Hello, everyone. We're going to go over the features of a short story. These obviously don't cover everything when it comes to fiction, but it'll be a good starting place in terms of things that you should look for when you're looking at a piece of fiction to determine whether or not it's a short story in fiction, and just some things to consider as you're creating your own fictional piece. So we're just going to look at a quick example here to begin with. This is from a short story called The Neglected Senses by Rosemary Mahoney. She agreed to let herself be blindfolded and led through the streets of Lhasa by two blind teenage girls, Choden and Yangchen. Rosemary Mahoney is a citizen of both Ireland and the United States. So she was blind for the first time. She was visiting a country in a language that she didn't speak, but these girls do speak some English, so we'll see that here. And anyway, now we go right, Yangchen said, gently steering me with her arm. How do you know that? You feel the ground get different here under your feet? I had felt nothing, but now that Yang Chen had brought it to my attention, I realized that the ground we were walking on was very uneven. When I told the girls that I had felt nothing different, that the ground had seemed to me to be always uneven, they stopped, turned me around, and took me back to the start of the street. Rose, now we show you. You must go and feel the street here. Yang Chen tapped my shin firmly with her cane to indicate that I should try the street out with my foot. The gesture was surprisingly authoritative. It was also intimate in the way the gestures of a good teacher often are. You feel how it feels. I smeared the soles of my shoes around. It feels smooth, like concrete pavement. Yeah, smooth. Now come and you walk. We walked 10 paces on the smooth pavement, and then very abruptly, the pavement changed and became something like cobblestone or roughly hewn brick. The first time around, I hadn't registered the change, which astonished me because the contrast was in fact sudden and marked. I had simply not been paying attention to what was under my feet. Why would I? When one is in the habit of anticipating the path ahead by sight, one rarely makes conscious note of or even actually feels in any lasting way the texture of the path. When we feel the ground coming different under our feet, we know where we find ourselves, Yang Chen said. Now, this is actually a piece of nonfiction, meaning that this is a true story, but we can learn about good writing from this example. We'll go over that in just a moment. So first, we're going to talk about the features of a story, starting with plot. So a story can follow a variety of structures that many people have used and studied throughout time. One is this first one where you see a mountain. You can start your story with exposition, which is background information that establishes the setting and describes the situation. Then we've got rising action, where characters face or try to solve a problem. This results in conflicts within themselves, like where they've got to make a tough decision, or conflicts with others. Then we have a climax. So eventually the story reaches a crucial moment. The tension that is building reaches a peak. Now, usually, actually, this is not just a straight up triangle like this. Now, usually the structure will actually be more like this. You see at the bottom of your screen here. Let's see if I can draw. There we go. Where it's mostly rising action. The climax comes closer to the end, and then we have falling action. So sometimes called the denouement, this part of the story explores the consequences of the climax. The tension in the story begins to ease. We're sort of wrapping up the loose ends, and then we have the resolution. The central problem is finally solved, leaving the reader with a sense of completion. So this is something that we see especially in a lot of movies, in a lot of whole novels will go through this structure. There are other ways to structure a story or think about kind of how a story moves from beginning, middle to end. You'll see the 5 C's story structure on the top right. So first is context, the backstory. We might get an introduction to the hero or protagonist's world. Then an event, something changes in the hero's or protagonist's world. We've got a complication, otherwise known as the obstacle. So the hero or protagonist is faced with a problem and a choice. Then we have a change known as the transformation. The hero or protagonist decides on a path and a plan to overcome the obstacle, and then there's a resolution. The hero's character, fate, world, and worldview are altered. They're coming out a different person than they started with. So that story structure is one way to think about it. And then you also see the 3-act story structure we see on the bottom right. This is also something that we see in a lot of movies. You'll see that there's Act 1 is setup, Act 2 is confrontation, and Act 3 is resolution. It also tells about how much time this should take in your story or in the movie. And then on the bottom of that tiny graph, you can kind of see that it's starting in the same way with exposition. There's some inciting incident, something that's going to kind of change things. And then we see a big plot point, rising action, another big plot point. Something's going to happen right before the climax, usually to up the stakes a little bit more with the climax, and then the following action. So if you were thinking about, okay, I'm trying to write a short story, but I don't really know how to use the plot diagrams that Ms. Smith just showed me to write my own short story, you can use Somebody Wanted But So Then. This is a good technique for summarizing a story that you've already read or writing your own story. So somebody is who the main character is, the protagonist. What did the character want? What do they need? What are they going for in the story? The but is, what's the problem? Why can't they get what they want or what they need? That could be something like a conflict with another person, like they want the love of their mother, or it could be they need something to eat. The conflict is that they're starving, they're very hungry. But is something's getting in the way of that? So is, how is the problem resolved? And then finally, how does the story end? So that's a good way if you're trying to come up with a way to write your short story, to kind of structure it like this on paper first, then see if you can fit it into the plot diagrams that we just looked at, what you had written in your Somebody Wanted But So Then chart. You can expand it a little bit with one of these, and then your plot will be ready to go. The next thing to think about is setting. Setting is the context in a scene or story that describes the elements in which a story is taking place. Now, this includes time, like when is the story happening? How long is it spanning over? The place and the environment. And by environment, we're thinking about like the social climate. So what are things like around that person socially? This provides reader with context on the narrative, such as describing the when and where of the setting. I think we've maybe seen some like bad movies or TV shows, or we've read a bad short story or book, and we have no idea where it's taking place, or how long this was supposed to take place over. And it's confusing for readers, really disorients them. So making these things evident in your story will help the reader picture in their mind what's going on and feel like they are keeping up with the story. So 6 ways to make story settings vivid we see on the right side. One is to use detail. So we see, for example, in the Harry Potter books that J.K. Rowling gives Hogwarts its own layout, secrets, codes of conduct. The more that you can kind of picture this as a real place in your head, the better you're going to be doing of describing it on the page. So not just like a forest, but what kind of forest? Where is the forest? And what is the forest filled with? Are they on a path, or are they walking off the path? And if they are, what kind of things are in their way? The more detail that you can use to describe the setting, the more vivid it's going to be. The next is to learn from others, the next trick. So if you are looking to set your story, let's say in Nigeria, look for other stories that are set in Nigeria to get a better idea of how they describe the setting. Tip 3 is to make the setting vital to the plot. So make the setting perhaps one of the conflicts that the main character has. Maybe like we said with the woods, they're having trouble getting through the setting, or all of a sudden there's a weather event from the setting, or the social climate of the setting is creating a problem for them. Show time's effect is tip number 4. So when somebody returns to a place after a long time, we can see that it's changed. Use symbolism is trick number 5. What does your setting symbolize? Does it symbolize hope and, a new future and all the hard work kind of paying off, or kind of the opposite? Does it represent death, decay, the loss of hope? And then finally, number 6, what would a newcomer see, taste, hear, feel, smell? That you want to invoke the senses, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit too. All right, next we're going to talk about characterization. So this is the way that the author develops characters and reveals their traits or qualities. Great stories include characters that feel like real people. So one way to characterize characters is just through direct characterization, which is when the author just tells us about a character. The author makes a direct statement, like Ron is honest, or Harry Potter was brave. It's just saying what we should know about the character straight up. That could be like what they look like, it could be how they're feeling, or what kind of a person they are. The next way to characterize characters is, I think, the stronger, better way is indirect characterization. The more advanced you get in your reading, you're going to see that this is more and more the case. The character shows us who they are. It's what we can infer from the character's actions and interactions with others. In other words, what we can guess about them from how they're behaving or what they're saying. So, for example, Ron found cash on the floor and turned it into the office. That shows that Ron is honest. We don't need to say Ron is honest. He's shown us that through his actions and his speech. So there's a Steele method for indirect characterization. So how can you make characters seem like real people without saying, I was a very brave person? So the ways are through speech, thoughts, the effect that the characters have on others, their actions, and their looks. So how does the character speak, and what does the character say? Do they have an accent? Do they use slang or use very formal language? And what exactly are they saying? Those can tell us things about them. With any of these Steele method indirect characterizations, think about your friends. The things that they say and the way that they say them tell you about who they are. The effect that they have on the people around them, on their teachers, on their friends, on their parents, tells us something about them. Maybe that they're very stubborn because they're always getting in conflicts with their stubborn mother, or maybe that they're very popular, and we can tell that because everyone seems to be loving them. Their actions, again, think about your friends. The things that they do and the ways that they behave tell you about who they are as people. And one thing that you can do when you're writing a fictional short story is give characters looks that can also tell us something about them. So consider not just the physical description, but body language, facial expressions, and dress. But you can also, consider like maybe they're wearing a lot of light clothes in your story to show that they're a representation of good versus evil. Maybe you want them to look very disheveled because they're a very disorganized person. So you can alter the looks of the character too to tell us something about their character. All right, next is dialogue. So we can figure out, or we can make our story seem more real by including dialogue. Dialogue helps us understand where characters are from, their personality traits, and how they're feeling about situations and other characters. Dialogue provides realism. It makes the story seem real because in real life we have conversations and we talk to one another. Dialogue is an example of showing instead of telling. Instead of saying like, my mom and I fought. Showing that fight is a good way of making the story seem more real. And dialogue can slow down the pace or speed it up, which can add to effects like suspense. Now, looking at our example again from the neglected senses, we can see here how dialogue helps us learn about the author and narrator. For example, you can see the highlighted sections here where the young woman Yang Chen and the narrator / author are talking to one another. We can learn about both characters. And anyway, now we go right, Yang Chen said, gently steering me with her arm. How do you know that? You feel the ground got different here under your feet? So just from that little bit, we could tell that Yang Chen is a confident expert at what is happening right here. And the author narrator is not. She is a novice, but she's also not afraid to ask questions. Next, we see, when I told the girls that I had felt nothing different, that the ground had seemed to me to always be uneven. Here we don't really see dialogue. We don't see directly two characters talking to one another. We see kind of a telling instead of showing mention of dialogue. We see that, once again, the narrator is a newbie, and not only that, she's not very observant. We also see Yang Chen talk again, saying, "Rose, now we show you, you must go and feel the street here." So we're noticing not only is Yang Chen an expert, she's also like a leader and a teacher. And we notice that her English isn't necessarily very great. We see a lot of monosyllabic or one-syllable words. The sentences are a little grammatically awkward, so perhaps not a native English speaker. We see, she says, "You see how it feels. I smeared the soles of my shoes around. It feels smooth, like concrete pavement." Then Yang Chen says, "Yeah, smooth. Now come and you walk." So we see her again, kind of like a very curt, to the point teacher. Perhaps that's how she is anyway, is just kind of, she gives the facts to the point. Yes, it's smooth. Now you walk over here. Like that's, getting to the point pretty directly. Then finally we see Yang Chen say, "When we feel the ground coming different under our feet, we know where we find ourselves," Yang Chen said. So not only is Yang Chen there saying something, here's how you navigate without the use of your sight. She's acting as an expert and teacher again. We also see the limited use of her English. But we see a really beautiful sentiment here. Like, when we feel something, we know where we are. That's kind of a big idea from the whole short story. It's like we notice things, and that's how we figure out how we navigate our lives, our world, the streets. And in this way, we're also figuring out that Yang Chen is pretty wise. She's not just observant, but she's smart. Now, the thing I keep mentioning that is important to note is the features of a short story. One is show, don't tell. I say that a lot. So that means that you are going to have the reader feel like they're there. You're going to show us dialogue, show us a scene, show us a place, show us a character, instead of telling us about those things. And ways to do that are using active verbs to show what's happening. For example, called, stepped, hung, swung, raised, pulled, watched, dropped, ran. All of those very strong verbs go with a very strong mental image. Number 2, use the exact words a character spoke. "Strike 2, the umpire called." Instead of just saying the umpire, called another strike. We're able to see the scene better when we hear the words of the characters. Number 3, show the feelings of a character by what he does. Hung my head, heartbeat throbbing in my ears. You don't necessarily need to tell us this person feels sad. We can see she ran into her room, slammed her door, and shoved her face in her pillow. Like, that can tell us that somebody is upset just as easily and even better than saying that somebody is sad. Finally, number 4, paint pictures with specific words or group of words. For example, I raised the bat over my shoulder. Waiting, I dropped the bat and ran and ran and ran. So we can see it wasn't just I hit the ball and ran to first base. I raised the bat over my shoulders. Very specific. It kind of slows down the action a little bit so that we really get a sense of what's happening. Now, here are some things to avoid, to not do when you're showing, not telling. Get rid of all basic sensory words. So phrases like I heard, I felt, I smelled are all very weak. These are telling words and phrases. They're like filters that force the reader further away from you and your experience. So instead of I heard something scurry across the floor, saying something scurried across the floor is stronger. Now the reader can hear it instead of trying to hear it through you hearing it. Number 2, don't use emotion explaining words. Think of any word to describe an emotion. So I'll help you out a little: happy, sad, angry, frustrated. If you need your readers to understand how excited you were at any given time or how excited a character was, show them, don't just tell them. I was so excited. Show them the sweat beading on your forehead as you race to your destination. Show them the lifting of your cheeks as your lips parted way for an uncontrollable smile. That is like, I get goosebumps reading that. That's a much better way of showing how you're feeling instead of just explaining. And then number 3, don't ignore body language. A person's actions are really a gateway to their mind and how they feel. It's the same thing with our friends. We can tell when they're having a bad day, when they're upset, when they're really excited by how their body moves. You can tell another person has a crush on someone else just by paying attention to the way their body adjusts when in that person's presence. So show us that in a story. So one way to work on showing, not telling in your writing is to circle all the telling words in your writing. Heard, felt, she told me that this. And then write down the how of each sense. So instead of heard, what did you hear? Crunching, footsteps, shoes, shuffling. Instead of felt, write down how you felt. Chill. I felt running. I felt goosebumps. I felt a breeze. And now add those words to the sentence instead. Don't just replace them with I crunching footsteps, but instead footsteps crunched behind me as my shoes shuffled across the concrete. Ooh, so much better. All right, so here's an example of a telling sentence. It was an unusual cat. Here is a showing sentence for the same kind of idea. Because the cat's yellow eyes were glowing, its long black fur stood on end, its mouth was full of sharp pointed teeth, and it emitted a yowl like a tiger, I knew that the small animal before me was no ordinary cat. Now we're really getting a sense of how unusual it was. Here's another example. The pizza was delicious. Instead, show me how delicious it was. Make me taste that pizza. Here's a showing sentence. Mushrooms and pepperoni formed thick layers on top of one another, while the white mozzarella cheese bubbled over the bright red tomato sauce. Each time I took a bite, I planned it so that I got a taste of every luscious ingredient. My taste buds celebrated every single time. Now I can tell how delicious that pizza really was. And I'm getting hungry. I could taste it. All right. So just to kind of wrap up here, showing creates mental pictures in the reader's mind. When readers get a clear picture, they are more engaged in the writer's story. Your favorite books are probably your favorite because you felt like you were in them. You had clear pictures. You felt like a character. So that's what we want to create for the readers of our short stories. By showing the actions and relationships and feelings instead of just telling the reader what happened, the writing comes off deeper and more meaningful. This creates a much deeper connection and brings readers closer to you. Here we see a great quote from Anton Chekhov. Don't tell me the moon is shining. Show me the glint of light on broken glass. That one brings tears to my eyes. It's so beautiful. All right, so if you are going to write a story, follow these guidelines, but also study examples. Pick up your favorite book again and read a chapter. Look up, best short stories of 2021 and read an example of what most people consider an expert model of a short story. Search short stories for teens. Look up the kind of thing that you're hoping to write and study how is this organized? How do they begin and end? How does the author make characters seem like real people? How does the setting feel like something that I can see in my mind right now? How is the author doing that? And studying those examples is really going to be the best way to write a great fictional short story.